Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Fighting Matters. Today, we've got three countries represented. We've got me, Stephan Kesting from graplarts.com in Canada. We've got Jeff Shaw from Bellingham, BJJ in the United States. And we've got Tyson LaRone from the country of Alberta, or soon to be Alberta, after they split off after U.S. agitation. So welcome to the podcast. If you've been following the news on this topic, the Alberta Prosperity Project, which is kind of the organization or one of the organizations arguing that Alberta, a very oil-rich province in Canada, should split off, possibly be its own country, possibly to join the United States, has been meeting with the U.S. State Department, the department headed by Marco Rubio, about getting funding or support for their project. So Tyson, can you fill in some more details beyond that pencil sketch?
Well, one of these days we're going to have to do a podcast episode where we talk about something fun and not triggering. We could get together and talk about jujitsu or something. It is so strange being like living in Alberta in the generation I do, because these sorts of anti-Ottawa, pro-Alberta independence sentiments started long before I was born, but never really ramped up to the levels we're seeing now until about, I would say, the last decade. And it hasn't been a linear process either. These have been like sort of climbing over the last decade. And the last 2 years, it has gone crazy to the point where we now are we're at serious risk of at least being forced to go to the stage where we have a referendum in the province on whether or not we would like to start the process. And that is due in part to our Premier, Danielle Smith, having gone out of her way to make the process of getting a petition approved for a referendum like that much, much easier. She claims to be anti-separation, but she has done these sort of they've enacted this targeted policy to make it so that in order to trigger a referendum, they really only need signatures on their petition from about 6% of the voting population of Alberta to trigger a referendum on whether or not we leave. And that is that's as somebody who's always lived in Alberta and always heard these same sorts of people being angry about these same sorts of things, to have it getting that real is still now really hard to believe and infuriating all at once. The Americans are definitely not helping. Sorry to say. It's there's several reasons for that, but once again, you have the Alberta Prosperity Project claiming they talked to senior officials in the White House, and like they've gone so far as to say the people we talked to left our meeting and went to the Oval Office. That's what they're claiming. So far, Scott Bessent is like the highest profile guy that's actually mentioned this, and like they're making a big deal out of him having mentioned it, but really all he did was say that we're a very proud independent people and we're a natural partner for the United States. And he didn't say that he would like it for us to separate. He didn't give support to either side. He just kind of laid out what's happening, like what we're talking about. So it's not quite real yet, but it's gotten so much more real in the last 2 years than it has ever been before, and the trend alone is alarming.
So Scott Bessent is not in the State Department. Scott Bessent is the head of the Treasury, head of the Treasury. So then we've had at least two of U.S. We've allegedly the State Department, that would actually be the role of the State Department to talk to other countries. So what's the Treasury doing involved with this?
One could ask a lot of those kinds of questions, right? It's like, because they're always very careful to say, well, we're just private citizens. We don't have to. Oh, what was God, I'm blanking on his name. The guy who was in like Dragon's Den.
Kevin O'Leary.
Kevin O'Leary. All right, same thing. Him like flying down with Jordan Peterson and Danielle Smith to hang out at Mar-a-Lago with Trump, and people are like, "What are you doing? Why are you negotiating on behalf of the country? You're not even elected. You two aren't even elected officials." And their response to that is always, "Oh, we're just private citizens. We're allowed to go and talk to people." It's like, you're not just talking to people. You're talking to the president of the United States. And you're not officially negotiating on behalf of the country, but you are giving him a very clouded, dishonest idea of what's actually going on back in Canada. So the Alberta Prosperity Project is kind of doing that now, where they're flying down there just to meet with whoever will agree to meet with them. I mean, these people in Trump's administration aren't that busy right now, right? They're, there's plenty of people whose job it is to be like, "Sorry, who's here to meet with me? All right, whatever. I'll sit in a room with them for a couple hours and to hear what they want to say." Like, if you're able to get past the point where you can at least be in the house talking to somebody, then you can claim you're talking to whatever level of officials you want to. And if anybody asks you, or if anybody scrutinizes who you were talking to or why, you could just say, "Oh, well, I can't divulge that information. They were such high level officials." Like, they're saying things that really mean nothing. And I think the only reason Scott Bessent even brought it up is because they literally asked him about it. I think the reporter actually posed the question to him, so he felt like he had to say something, but he didn't seem to have much to say.
So, Jeff, as our token American here, uh, obviously in the last year, since Trump started talking about Canada becoming the 51st state, a lot of MAGA has fallen in behind this, saying, yes, the United States needs Canada. And if our orange glorious leader wants Canada, then I want Canada as well. And there's been a whole bunch of, shit coming out of the White House, like images of or maps that include Canada, Greenland, and Venezuela, and Mexico sometimes as part of grand unified America, or the American Reich, if you will. But with regards to this Alberta thing, what percentage of Americans would even be able to tell you that Alberta is in Canada, would you guess?
I would say less than 24%, which is the number of people who strongly approve of the job Donald Trump is doing as president. So it's interesting as an American watching this, and Tyson, you sound skeptical of this, which I'm glad to hear. One of the things that's interesting as an American is things that were never on the table and that you would have thought were not possible, are suddenly there on the agenda. And so it is difficult to tell exactly how serious this is. Before we go further, I should make clear that I'm speaking as a private citizen, not in my official capacity as a representative of the United States government. But like, if
Whew. So weight off my chest.
if you were to tell me, and I'll make some analogies later, but the thing is, the U.S. and Canada are not just historical allies or traditional allies, but Canada's our most important ally. And I live about 20 minutes from the Peace Arch border, where there is a giant park that says "Children of a Common Mother," and there's always been such friendship between the U.S. and Canada. And so, what I'm about to say would have been unthinkable to me even 2 years ago. But it is very possible that these Alberta Prosperity Project people are just kind of full of it and are trying to get something on the agenda that's not really on the agenda in the United States. That's very possible. It's also possible that this is a conscious strategy by the administration to destabilize our traditional ally, which, like I said, 2 years ago would have sounded insane. But then 2 years ago, the US president referring to our closest ally as the 51st state and threatening several times to do whatever he has to, including purchase or invasion, to acquire it would have seemed equally unthinkable. And so I don't know. It's very tough to tell with these people because, as the great conservative columnist George Will wrote this week, in this loutocracy, you should assume they're lying until proven otherwise. And so you can't really take anything the US says at face value. So what do we know? We observe from their behavior that they seem to not want to let this go. It seems like it could be just red meat for the base, as in this is a muscular American longing for a bygone era of colonialism. I would also say, side note, this is one reason it's really, really dangerous to elect egomaniacs, because I think a lot of what Trump and the people around this are doing like with the putting his name on the Kennedy Center, things of that nature, stuff that would not have made it on the policy agenda, are just things that he knows will be written about in the history books, which I think is where he's kind of obsessed with now. He wants to make an American triumphal arch that is 250 feet high. No American cares about this. He dismantled half of the White House and is going to put up an ugly, gaudy gold lame ballroom. No American cares about this. But these are all things that I think in his mind would elevate him to, oh, and this was a historical achievement by this historical president, as opposed to just someone that was both reviled by those who remembered him, but forgotten by the vast majority of Americans. So this, I think, is a specific manifestation of that larger problem. Can't say for certain what's going on, but it wouldn't surprise me if the U.S. was trying to destabilize our ally to achieve those goals.
Certainly, in this day and age, we would expect that any invasion of Canada, let's just go with the biggest picture possible, any invasion of Canada would be preceded by things exactly like this, and also a massive wave of bot-powered propaganda and a massive amount of misinformation and disinformation. So there'd be funding of local separatist groups. There would be a gargantuan full frontal assault on every social media platform, since pretty much all social media platforms, or all major social media platforms, are in the bag for Trump, right? The oligarchs are all supporting him right now, and they have control over TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, YouTube.
Certainly do.
So that you would expect a ramping up of stories of how dysfunctional Canada is and how Canadians are protesting in the streets, begging the United States to come in and free us from the tyranny of Justin Trudeau, who's already been gone for a bunch of years, but hey, we're just going to ignore that fact. And that this is exactly what we'll expect.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point. It's like, it doesn't matter how likely you think it is to happen. It's hard not to be worried about it when what it looks like before it happens or what it looks like before it doesn't happen are exactly the same.
So take us through the case for Alberta separation. I mean, the little bits and pieces I hear from the separatist movement is how much Alberta has suffered at the hands of the federal government, being trapped in a non-reciprocal relationship with the rest of Canada.
Yeah, it's the separatist movement is based on several key talking points that sound good until you think about them for about 5 seconds. Okay. Uh, and I say that like it's a joke, but it really, really isn't. And I don't want to say that the people who are supporting Alberta separatism are stupid, uh, or that they are incapable of applying this kind of critical thinking process elsewhere in their lives. But what we know in the era of social media and the ability to find a sort of confidently presented, charismatic, professional looking source to tell you just about anything, that you could choose whether or not to subject your impulses to the process of critical thinking. You could choose what you want to just believe because it sounds good, it feels good in your heart, and what you want to check, like, maybe I should ask somebody who actually knows what they're talking about this. Because if you don't want to hear something, you don't have to hear it. And if you want to find something, you could find it. It's kind of like when people are like, "Oh, I don't want politicians running politics because, like, they're just not down to earth enough. I want a guy that I can have a beer with." Like, okay, let's apply that in any other aspect of your life. I'm on a plane right now. Well, these pilots, they're out of touch with the common man. I don't like the idea that some pilot went to some kind of fancy-dancy pilot school and looks down on me because they're educated as a pilot and I'm not. I could fly this plane, right? I want a pilot I can have a beer with, not one that can fly a plane. Like, they would never, ever say that. But when it comes to running an entire country and being responsible for one of the most important economies on earth, all of a sudden it's, who you want to have a beer with is the number one qualifying thing. So so when they talk about when I talk about these things, and I talk about how they crumble to dust when you nudge them with even the surface level scrutiny. I'm not saying this because I'm saying that everybody is stupid that believes in this cause, because I really do believe that if you were to take all these people who seem to apply none of their critical thinking ability in this particular area of their life when they talk about politics, you could find endless applications of critical thinking skills everywhere else in their lives. But if they don't want to hear this, they don't have to. And if they don't have to, they won't. So I guess I'm just kind of prefacing that, saying that, like, I'm going to talk about why these key talking points are stupid, but I'm not calling you stupid for believing in them. I understand how how somebody can be very smart in some ways and still believe in some things that if they actually wanted to apply some critical thinking skills, they could. They're choosing not to. And so, like you said, the idea that Alberta is so hard done by, that sort of manifests itself in several ways. One big thing that people like to talk about is equalization, because we have a process in Canada where tax revenue that is collected by the federal government is paid out to provinces in several different ways, and equalization payments are one of the ways in which the federal government ensures that certain provinces that might not be as rich with natural resources, or maybe the main sort of economic engines of their economy are not not booming at the moment. They're, for whatever reason, factors out of their control, are they're in an economic slump, that they can continue to provide the quality of life that, as Canadians, we've decided that all of our citizens deserve. Right? We have decided as a country that if you are a Canadian citizen, that you deserve this sort of baseline quality of life. So equalization payments are distributed by the federal government as a way to make sure that every province, regardless of what kind of economic challenges it might be facing, is able to provide that baseline of services for Canadians, which, sounds good. But the issue that is brought up when it comes to equalization and Alberta separatism is the idea that Alberta doesn't benefit from equalization, and we're just paying into it, and then all of our money is going to other provinces, and we're a have province that's propping up the have not provinces, and without us, the whole opera would fall apart. And to me, this is it's just a failure of education. I think that this is a pure and simple failure of education. People think that people don't understand how equalization works, so it's very easy to tell them, oh, well, if we just stopped paying into equalization, then all these other provinces would fall apart, and we don't actually get anything out of equalization. Therefore, if we were to separate, we would just get to keep all of that money, and it would stop going to prop up all these provinces that hate us. So for the listeners that don't actually understand what equalization is, there is no check that Alberta cuts to equalization. Okay, that's the first thing to understand. There's no, Ontario contributed this and Alberta contributed this amount and Quebec contributed this amount, and then these amounts went out to provinces. No. There's no Alberta pays this. It is collected in income tax to the federal government. It is collected in excise taxes. It is collected in GST, which is a general savings tax. And when we're talking about, Alberta contributes this much, this is the amount of money being collected in these ways from people who live in Alberta. Okay, and so that's a really important key factor to understand, because when they say Alberta needs to separate because we're being taken advantage of and all of our money is going to Ottawa and then they're giving it to everyone else, that is an extremely misleading way to frame the situation. Because, especially in the context of separation, if we were to break down what Alberta as a province contributes to Ottawa to equalization in the form of all these different taxes, and then completely disregard where those taxes come from, and also how much of it we would actually get to keep and how it would be used if we were to separate. If you don't pay attention to any of that stuff, then it sounds great. Like, okay, we're giving up this money, it's going everywhere else, blah, blah, blah. But that's the first thing to understand, is that it's not Alberta giving this money, it's Albertans giving this money. But not all Albertans contribute evenly. So if you were to look at the breakdown of how much money from the majority of Albertans are actually contributing to GST and excise taxes and income taxes, it's really not that different from anyone else in Canada. What is different is that Alberta has the greatest wealth inequality out of any province in Canada. Okay, the difference in income between the top 20% of earners and the bottom 20% of earners in Alberta has increased about 62% since the 90s. So we have massive wealth inequality in this province, and that results in a small group of extremely wealthy Albertans contributing a lot in taxes to the federal government, because they pay more in income taxes because they are taxed at higher rates because they make more money, and they pay more in GST because they buy more expensive things. So if you look at it like if you look at it in terms of averages and medians, right? Because once again, you can present information in ways that are technically true but very misleading. I could tell you, like, you could look at a particular company where employees there are taking collective action and unionizing and trying to advocate for themselves because they're not being paid enough. And you could say, like, okay, well, a good wage for this job is about $60,000, and the average income in that company is $60,000. So what are they complaining about? That sounds good on face value until you take a look at it and say, okay, well, in that company, one guy makes $1 million and the other 99 make 50,000.
Yeah.
That works out to an average income of $60,000. So you can say, well, what are they complaining about? So if you present it as an average, it's very misleading. And the average, but if you look at the median income in that company, it will be $50,000, because the median income is the average of the 50th and 51st percentiles. So things like medians are much more outlier resistant than averages. So when they talk about the Alberta advantage and people in Alberta make so much more money than everyone else, and we're just giving it all away to Ottawa, and then they're giving none of it back, and then what they're actually describing is an average that's being pulled way up by that very small group of extremely wealthy people who live in Alberta, and it's giving a very different picture than what's actually happening on the ground. The vast majority of Albertans make about as much money as Canadians in every other province. The median income in Alberta is like 50 grand, I think it was. Median income in Ontario is about 49. Median income in BC is about 48. Like, it's not a crazy difference. But the average income of Alberta is way above those provinces. So when we talk about equalization and how, oh, we're giving all this money to Ottawa and they're giving none of it back, most Albertans are not giving Ottawa any more money than any other Canadians are. We have a small number of extremely wealthy people in this province who are giving a disproportionate amount of money away in taxes and don't like it and want to pay less in taxes. What most Albertans do, however, benefit from is the $9 billion, $10 billion that this province gets back in Canada Health transfers and Canada Social transfers and targeted infrastructure funding for affordable housing and all these things that we get back from the federal government that actually goes to benefit the majority of Albertans, because the majority of us aren't making those crazy amounts of money. So it's not our money that's being disproportionately given to Ottawa and then not given back in a way that benefits us. It's a disproportionate amount of people who are disproportionately wealthy, and most people in Alberta don't make enough money that they're not benefiting from all that money that comes back to provide the essential services that we depend on. So if Alberta were to separate, hypothetically, and let's say everyone who lives in Alberta stays in Alberta, hypothetically, what would actually happen is the disproportionate amount of taxes that are paid to the federal government would instead be paid into whatever kind of tax system would be created for the country of Alberta, right? So these wealthy people, these disproportionately wealthy people who are extremely wealthy, far wealthier than the actual majority of Albertans, they would be involved in the political process of negotiating. Okay, well, what kind of tax system is the country of Alberta going to have? Okay. And we already know that the conservative government of Alberta and most people on the right side of the political spectrum seem to have this idea that if you tax rich people less, it's good for poor people. Right. So any measure that was taken by the new country of Alberta's government to say, well, we need to keep all these rich people here in Alberta so that they could create jobs for all of you people. So we don't want to scare them off. So we're going to lower their taxes far below what the federal government was already charging them, because otherwise, why would they bother?
So I once heard a description of conservatism or the conservative movement as using culture war issues to occupy the middle and lower classes while giving tax breaks and regulation cuts to the upper classes. And that sounds like that's exactly what's going on here, that, the people behind the Alberta Prosperity Project, the people associated with the Western Standard, which is a newspaper with big air quotes around news, or Rebel
Yep.
News, another more sets of air quotes. These are not average down home Albertans that you'd have a beer with. You're never going to have a beer with them because they are, sipping champagne and, having.
Yeah, you have no idea these people exist. And they know you exist because they depend on you in a lot of ways, but they don't give a shit that you exist. Right. And not to go off on a tangent here, but this is why Marxists really were really against the First World War, because they were trying to convince people like, hey, you don't need to go and fight and die for these people, because you, the working class in England, have a lot more in common with the working class in Germany than you do with the higher class and the royalty in your country. Right. So like I say, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what equalization is and the kinds of people who would benefit from a separation and a new country of Alberta tax system. Because I'll tell you something, the rich people in Alberta, if they do have an interest in separating from the country of Canada, they have no interest in separating from the country of Canada and all the economic fallout that would occur from that, just to pay more or even the same taxes that they're already paying, right? Danielle Smith has said many times we should be following the economic freedom examples of the United States, where obviously the wealth inequality is some of the worst in the world, and certainly in any developed country. So we have so if we were to hypothetically separate from Alberta, or separate Alberta from Canada, we would stop getting the $10 billion a year from the federal government in the form of the Canada Health Transfer, Canada Social Transfer, and all these targeted infrastructure funding projects and all that. That will be gone. So those programs that the majority of Albertans actually do use and depend on, whether they know it or not, that's gone. And what is going to replace it would have to be some kind of similar funding structure from the Alberta country, or like the Alberta federal government, which is likely going to be a far less progressive tax structure than we have in Canada right now, which means these people are paying even less in taxes. And they're going to be the ones that are essentially in a position to say yes or no, we don't want to pay for this or we do want to pay for that. So that fundamental misunderstanding of who's actually paying all this money to Ottawa, it's not the majority of Albertans, it's a few extremely wealthy ones. The majority of Albertans are paying the same amount of money into equalization that all Canadians are. So that's a really important thing to understand. And that's the first thing where I guess I've thought about it for more than 5 seconds, to be fair. Uh, but yeah, it's one of those things where like the whole idea of the Alberta advantage has been really kind of amped up, not just for separatist rhetoric, but also just general conservative rhetoric. Because a lot of people voted for Danielle Smith, not necessarily because they actually understand the ramifications of her economic policies or social policies, but because she was a person that's going to fight with Ottawa. And as an Albertan conservative politician, if you say you're going to fight with Ottawa for the sake of fighting with Ottawa, that'll get you votes, right? You don't have to get anything for it, but they feel like we're in a fight with Ottawa. So any politician that's willing to fight with Ottawa, whether it makes sense or not, is going to be popular among the right wing the right leaning voters in this province. So this idea of the Alberta advantage that, well, we have everything here that we need, right? And we have everything that the rest of the country wants. That's why all these people want to move to Alberta, because we're such an amazing place to be. And we have such low housing costs and we make so much money. And that's why we'd be better off on our own. So all of these different things that, like, you've heard the term the Alberta advantage, I'm guessing, right? It's something that our governments have paid to put on billboards across the country to encourage people to move here. But the Alberta advantage, for the most part, is bullshit. Again, like the difference between the average income in this province and the median income in this province is one part of that. But even if you look at low housing costs, right? For a while there, we were attracting a lot of inter-country immigration from BC and Ontario because our housing costs were so much lower. What they don't realize and what we don't advertise as part of the Alberta advantage is that despite the insane predatory landlord practices out in Ontario, they actually have better rent control and landlord renter protection than we do in Alberta. So despite the fact that our housing costs are still a little bit lower, we have the fastest rising housing costs in the country. So so even the lower housing costs aren't going to last for long. Then there's things like transportation costs, right? If you live in Alberta, you have to drive everywhere, basically. If you live in Edmonton or Calgary, you have to drive everywhere. There's a joke that in Edmonton, everything is a half hour away from everything else, right? The urban planning is such that we are so spread out. We have more land mass than the city of Tokyo with less than 10% of the population, right? So you have to drive everywhere. So having a car, having insurance, paying for gas, paying to repair your car are essentially structural costs of living in Alberta. Like less than if you live in Toronto, which has by far the best public transportation system in all of Canada, something like 28% of the population has no car at all.
Yeah.
And
I think
another 40.
Montreal would also be similar. Montreal has a fairly decent transportation system, and it was not unusual when I lived there for, real life adults with real life jobs to not have a car and just rent it. It was a little bit like New York City, right? It's not unusual to be in New York City and not have a car.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have one, that it's probably for work, or maybe it's like a car that, or maybe it's a car that you just drive when you feel like it. It's recreational. You have the money for that, whatever it is. But like, but something like 1% of households in Toronto have 2 or more cars. But in the province of Alberta, 81% of households have 2 or more cars. And less than 1% of households in Alberta have no car at all.
Well, you need all those cars to carry your guns around.
I mean, we wish, Lot. There, our government is certainly dead set on the idea that we have the ability to have more guns than people have anywhere else in Canada. It's part of it. It's part of this whole sort of sovereignty package that they were pitching back when they won the last election, acting like Alberta could unilaterally give itself more power than it already has from the Confederation. But things like that, like people don't like, again, that is sort of pushed to the back. Things like that are pushed to the back. The things like the lack of rental protection, the fact that having a car and driving it around to get around is a structural cost that's going to be like $600 to $900 that you don't have in Toronto. Things like trying to not talk about median income in this province, to talk about average income instead. All those are part of the strategy of building up this idea that Alberta would be better off alone.
So you said that the argument for separation was based on several different strands, and I think we've covered this strand of financial grievance. What else is it built on?
Well, the next one is kind of interwoven in the economic argument as well, because they all sort of work together. The other one is the idea of Western alienation. The idea that our values and our issues are not represented in the federal government, and also that Ontario and Quebec kind of run Canada, and what they say goes, and what benefits them is what's going to get made into policy. That they are anti oil and gas, and therefore anti Alberta. And once again, it's all interwoven into the economic argument, because that's sort of the language that conservatives speak is the economics of it. But there's the sort of social and value based argument underneath that. They're like, we're not being listened to. Ontario doesn't care about us. Keep in mind, these are the facts don't care about your feelings people. If you ask them why they vote for conservative governments in Alberta, all they talk about is their feelings. We're not being listened to. They don't care about us. Like, they can't actually present the actual economic arguments for it, because there's no evidence to suggest that the Liberal government is anti-oil. I'll give you a great example, which is the TMX expansion, or the Trans Mountain X pipeline expansion. This is one of the biggest issues that conservatives have been talking about for decades now. Is that Ottawa hates Alberta. They don't want to build pipelines because they just hate oil and gas, and they're radical environmentalists, and they don't want to build a pipeline because that would benefit Alberta, and all they care about is what benefits Ontario and Quebec. And it has gotten to the point where they will pretend the Trans Mountain expansion never happened. They'll just pretend it never happened. They're still saying Alberta needs access to tidewater. We need to build a pipeline. It's like, we built the pipeline. The pipeline got built. Like, you guys know the pipeline got built, right? But they don't want to admit it. Why? Because Stephen Harper in 2012 approved the Trans Mountain expansion, but he approved it and tried to slam it through without any of his without fulfilling any of his constitutional obligations to the consultation of Indigenous groups whose lands were going to be affected by the construction of the pipeline. So in 2012, he says, yes, we're going to build this pipeline. It's in the national interest. We're going to build it. Kinder Morgan was the proponent. And they started the process of trying to get this pipeline built. But then it started getting tied up in lawsuits and protests, and it ended up going to court. And courts, not radical environmental liberal governments, overturned the approval for the TMX. They said that the federal government under Stephen Harper, the conservative federal government under Stephen Harper, had not fulfilled their obligations for in-depth, good faith negotiations and consultations with Indigenous groups in the area, which is their duty as the federal government of Canada. You can hate that you can hate the fact that there is the federal government's duty, but you can't argue that it is. It just is. So the court overturned the approval, and then 2015 comes around, and Justin Trudeau's Liberal government comes in, and they're basically given this mess of how to get this pipeline built and whether or not to build it. So they basically have to go back and do all of the things that Stephen Harper was supposed to do in the beginning. They have to go through the in-depth consultations with the Indigenous groups and the environmental protection agencies and the province of British Columbia, who, by the way, has a right to weigh in on whether or not and how a pipeline gets built through their territory, right? A lot of Albertans forget that because their expectation was that, well, this pipeline's in the national interest, so it should get built whether BC likes it or not. So basically, you're asking the federal government to respect Alberta's provincial autonomy by wiping their ass with BC's, right? So Justin Trudeau went through the process. He did all of that. And then Kinder Morgan starts getting cold feet about this, right? The fact that the first approval was overturned, the fact that there's still protests, the fact that there's still lawsuits, the fact that they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel for this project, they start thinking about walking away from it. And even then, Justin Trudeau, who is, let's not forget, is being painted as this radical environmentalist that hates oil pipelines so much. First of all, he never once came out and said he wasn't in support of the project. He approved it. He reapproved it. And when Kinder Morgan started talking about walking away, he offered for the federal government of Canada to backstop the project and guarantee Kinder Morgan's losses on the project. And despite that, Kinder Morgan eventually walked away. Then the Canadian government nationalized the TMX to bring it back from the dead and build it. Tell me how any of that sounds like a radical environmentalist who didn't want to get pipelines built. For somebody who apparently didn't want to get pipelines built, he did a whole lot of work. He stuck his neck out with his own supporters, right, to get this pipeline built. I mean, to me, this is part of my argument for how the Liberal Party's been center-right this whole fucking time, but we'll just talk about that another time. But Justin Trudeau has never been anti-pipeline. But despite that, despite the fact that, if he hated this pipeline so much, it was dead when Kinder Morgan walked away from it. All he had to do was let it stay dead. But he nationalized it to revive it, to get it back on track, to get it built. And when you talk to people in this province about it, because, like I say, despite the fact that this project would not exist without him, full stop, he has become the face of the opposition to it. It is the craziest thing. And when you bring that up, when people are like, oh, well, Trudeau hates pipelines, like, well, Harper didn't get a pipeline built. Trudeau did. Then they start talking about the cost overruns. Like, well, the cost overruns and the explosion in the price, and it was so much more expensive. Like, well, hold on a second, let's go back a step. First, you said it didn't get built. Then I told you it did get built. Now you're saying, well, yeah, they built it, but it was expensive. Okay.
Show me a project that does come in on time and under budget.
There's never been a pipeline built in North America that came in on or under budget. Most pipelines that have ever been built in North America come in 100% plus over budget. It's going in over budget is what pipelines do. Because, but again, it's like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they just sort of retreat back to this line or retreat back to this line or retreat back to this line. It's like, okay, so now we're living in a world where if Kinder Morgan had stayed on the project, they could have waved a magic wand and made mountains flatter and rivers shorter and prevented floods and mudslides and global supply chain disruptions. Like all that stuff would have just been magically free if Kinder Morgan had held on to it. So the whole idea of they hate us, they hate oil and gas, they hate Alberta, they don't listen to us, they don't value us. Once again, all of this, there's no actual evidence to suggest that that is the case. Like,
So, Jeff,
how,
can you think of some parallels in the U.S. situation? This narrative of grievance about how they hate us.
Not a one, although that did lead to I did have a follow-up question based on that because so Tyson, you've said a lot about, and I want to talk about the difference between policy and this sort of narrative grievance. I would point out also that as bad as Alberta's wealth inequality is, it's still better than every state in the United States and the U.S. national government. So when Albertans want to join with us, I'd say be careful what you wish for. But it seems to me I do understand this narrative of grievance, right? However it flies in the face of evidence and statistics and historical reality, everyone is susceptible to there's us and there's them, and the people in Ottawa, they don't like us, they don't respect us. The people in Ontario, they don't like us and they don't respect us. One thing that because we do have that in the United States all the time, like consistently, and it drives really poor public policy choices. I am curious because you mentioned a lot of the Albertan conservatives feel more of a values kinship with American libertarian capitalism. I'm wondering has that changed with the American saber rattling? I ask because in unit cohesion, when you do unit cohesion research, the biggest thing that drives cohesion of units, whether you're talking about military units or human social groups, it's the perception of an external enemy. And it sounds like there's a lot of Albertan conservatives that are like, our national government hates and disrespects us. But it seems weird when you have a neighbor to your south that's like, maybe we'll annex you. It would seem that to me, wherever I lived in Canada, that might galvanize myself against that external enemy. Have you observed that at all?
To a certain extent, I would say disappointingly little. I think that when it comes to Albertans in particular, I don't know what extent I don't know to what extent you would find this in like neighboring Saskatchewan or Winnipeg, but certainly in Alberta, people on the right in Alberta feel more kinship with conservatives in the United States than they do with progressives in Alberta. So when they think about what group they belong to, they think about themselves as part of the sort of Canadian and American group that are tired of all this woke liberal environmental snowflake bullshit. Like that's the group they feel they belong to first and foremost. And American media outlets and American owned Canadian media outlets have done a great job of identifying and amplifying that. And this is another thing that a lot of people don't actually realize about the right-wing media apparatus in Canada, because a lot of it is either American funded or American owned. The Fraser Institute, the Preston Manning Institute, not Rebel, but a lot of the people who either started, owned, or worked for the Rebel, all came from the Atlas Network, which is run by the Kochs. So Koch Industries, the money from Koch Industries, who, by the way, also refines something like 3/4 of the oil that comes out of Alberta to the United States. Let's talk about whether that's a coincidence or not. Also happens to run the majority of the right-wing media apparatus in this country. So American conservatives and Albertan conservatives feeling a kinship and feeling like that's the group they belong to, and the group that they're against is people with conflicting ideology in both Canada and the United States, is very much the result of a targeted marketing campaign. It's not something that has happened organically. There's no doubt in my mind that it has been identified and amplified on purpose.
How do they feel about being woke globalists too? Is it like libertarians of the world unite? It's kind of the opposite. But
Yeah, basically. And it's like, well, look at the World Economic Forum. Like both Canadian and American conservatives are in agreement somehow that the World Economic Forum is actually a globalist cabal of supervillains that are looking to turn us all into 15-minute cities and forcibly force our children to have transgender operations at school and like that. Both in the United States and Canada, they hate it when our leaders go to the World Economic Forum because they think that's what they're participating in. Like, it's
Yet then they go shopping
yeah.
at Costco and get all their cheap shit from China. What do you think globalism actually looks like? That is what global, like the ability to go into Walmart and get your bloody swimming pool for the summer for $100, or go to, Costco or Walmart and get socks for $3. When if they were made in North America, they'd be $15. They're more than happy to do that, but oh, be careful of the globalists.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, oh, they're all of our jobs are being outsourced to China. It's like, sorry, did governments do that? Or did companies do that because it was cheaper and they lobbied the government to loosen regulations so they could do it? And you voted for that.
It's one of the most interesting things in terms of policy versus vibes, and it's such a frustrating thing to argue against, because if you take a consistent position and you have a consistent framework to address the world, it is one of the most shocking things in the world to talk to one of the "Make America Healthy Again" people, because they will talk all about big corporations who don't have your best interests at heart, and they fund science that is not in the public interest, and all these greed heads that don't care about us. And then they will sell you their unregulated nutrition products and vote for politicians that gut the regulatory apparatus. And you wonder, I often try to get at these folks by talking with them about values, because we can all agree, look, the people in power don't necessarily have your best interests at heart. But the answer to that is not to give those people more power and more unrestrained ability to not have your best interests at heart.
Yeah. Yeah, because the unregulated health supplements industry doesn't make any money in the United States.
So with regards to Alberta separation, are there any strands we haven't pulled on yet? Uh, and if we have sort of exhausted the threads that are fueling this, what do you think is next?
Well, the thread we haven't talked about yet is perhaps the biggest one that doesn't get talked about enough, which is American interventionism. Um, because when Alberta's government uh talks about fighting for Albertans, who they really fight for are American shareholders. Because when you because we've had this once again very targeted propaganda campaign to be like, if you hate Alberta's oil and gas industry, you hate Alberta, right? Our whole identity is conflated with the oil and gas industry. And what I don't think a lot of Albertans know about the oil and gas industry in Alberta, or certainly not a lot of people on the right, is that we Albertans do not actually benefit from the profits of the oil and gas industry in Alberta nearly as much as Americans do. Okay? Because Alberta is really the only oil-rich jurisdiction in the world that allows this level of private ownership in the oil and gas industry. Right? If you want to drill in Norway, Norway reaps the vast majority of the profits from any kind of drilling or exploration that happens in Norway. Same thing in Saudi Arabia, same thing in Iran. But in Alberta, 75% of the shareholders in the oil sands are foreign shareholders. The vast majority of them are American. So whenever these companies get these massive tax breaks or government guaranteed interest free loans, or they're allowed to, just dump oil wells that are, dump these orphan and abandoned oil wells, cleanup costs. Hundreds of billions of dollars we're going to be paying for decades to clean up these orphan and abandoned oil wells that were just passed from one shell company to another until they were eventually dumped on the provincial government. So we have a situation in this province where 75%, three-quarters of the profits are being captured by foreign shareholders from our own natural resources. And it's crazy that more people don't know that. Like I would bet my house that if you were to go to any hardcore right-wing conservative in this province and ask them the question, do you think the majority of the profits from Alberta's natural resources should benefit Albertans? What will the answer be?
Yeah.
They're not
Yes,
going to
of
say
course.
no. They're not going to say no to that question because they've been conditioned to think that's already what's happening. I think most Albertans will be shocked to learn how small the percentage actually is. So so over the years, while production has gone up and profits have gone up and exports have gone up, and the oil industry in Alberta has been making more and more and more and more money, the actual profits, the share of the profits that go to Albertans, has been shrinking at the same time. So now we're down to about 24%. Albertans profit from about 24% of the profits in the oil and gas industry. And all the while that these companies are getting more and more and more tax breaks and making more and more money, they're not spending it on hiring more Alberta workers. They're spending more money in Alberta. It's getting paid into stock buybacks, dividends, shareholder bonuses, or they're investing it in other jurisdictions. And then when the oil leaves the province, the majority of it is going, what doesn't go to the Pacific Coast and the TMX is going south into the United States, where American refineries are refining so much Canadian oil that, once again, the gasoline that they refine from us and then resell elsewhere in the world, exported refined Canadian crude oil, even that alone is like a $700 billion industry or something like that for the United States. So
It's hard to see how that's ever going to get fixed. I mean, look at the grievance the United States carried towards Venezuela, nationalizing its oil. And was it 20 or 30 years later, boom, you get the snatching of the president and then some kind of backroom deal.
That's also led to the CIA coup against Mossadegh in Iran in the 50s, nationalization of the oil industry. One of the things.
Yeah, I mean, it's well,
But,
and
yeah,
that's a great example. I mean, in any something like 19 countries that they've admitted to, where the CIA has either directly or indirectly interfered in the political process because the government of that jurisdiction was starting to lean too far to the left for the taste of American corporate interests. So the idea that if we were to separate from Canada, then we would be our own little independent state, and we can make these deals that benefit us from with the United States to continue the flow of oil south. Like, what do you think would happen in an independent jurisdiction which is no longer part of Canada, but has a natural resource where American corporate interests are already capturing 75% of the profits from those natural resources? How long do you think the United States is really going to let us be an independent state of Alberta, if that's the case? Like, that's why it's so important that's why it's so important when you just look at the public opinion polling, because our premier, Danielle Smith, maintains that she is not herself a separatist, that she believes in making Alberta work within a unified Canada. But what she has done strategically as a political move is started to try to focus more on the idea of not becoming the 51st state, because she knows that even among Alberta separatists, only a very tiny amount of them want to become a part of the United States. So if something like support for Alberta separatism, who knows how good this polling is, but support for actually becoming a separate entity and leaving Canada is something like 20 or 30%, which is already insane. But support for becoming the 51st state is a tiny slice of those same people. So even if we were to actually help people to understand how likely it would be that we would become a territory of the United States, not an independent state within, that governs ourselves and doesn't owe allegiance to any particular nation, that wouldn't last a day. Like the United States has no reason to allow Alberta to negotiate on its own behalf when it comes to natural resources. Their American shareholders already own 3/4 of our natural resource profits.
Yeah. So, Jeff, I know you had some thoughts about other places in the world where internal dissent and separatist movements have been fomented by a large malicious superpower next door.
Yeah, I've one of the things that, not to be too America centric, but I think about this through an American lens. And one of the things that's most disappointing to me as an American who loves this country is that our allies don't trust us anymore, and they're right not to do so. Like, even if we somehow fix this in the next X number of years, I think the lesson for Canadians and other folks overseas in Europe, places that have been our historical allies, is that we're one quick turn away from unthinkable stuff. And like, I don't know how we come back from this. I think it's going to take a long time. But if America is like anything these days, it's if you think about what America is, it is an oligarchy that's driven by petrochemical interests, that has a concentrated wealth in the hands of a strong man who has his oligarchic allies, that works to destabilize free states nearby. It sounds an awful lot like Russia, because it is an awful lot like Russia. And I think ideologically, as well as strategically, the current regime in America has done a lot of the same things. And we have seen this is part of Russia's strategy with Ukraine, is to foment like ethnic Russian movements in Ukraine, to try to say Ukraine has always been part of Russia, right? In the same way that, and it's the rhetoric is even very similar. It's very short, simple words, destined to appeal to nativist elements that are not, as Trump says, the poorly educated, or the folks who he loves. And I think it's a lot of the same sort of stuff. And like, to loop this back, um, in terms of like my perspective on it, I think you're seeing the parallel I'm making between the way the U.S. is treating separatist movements and the way Russia is trying to destabilize Ukraine, which is not a flattering comparison for America, but we have to look it in the face and see that it's an accurate one. And I think that whereas in the past, America would ostensibly stand on the side of the democratically elected government that was invaded by the hostile superpower, unfortunately, we're seeing that can no longer, we can no longer rely on that.
There's even a martial arts connection there. We've had Stephen Kupfer on the podcast talking about how prior to the invasion of Ukraine, there was a lot of anti-Ukrainian government pro-Russian sentiment being stirred up in the martial arts community, especially in the Sistema and Sambo communities, where you had, Russian special forces who'd now been essentially sent to Ukraine to start martial arts clubs and create pro-Russian sentiment. So we're all martial artists, we're all jiu-jitsu guys, and it's not that far a situation from some of the biggest pro-MAGA movements in our social circles being martial arts guys. And there's a huge pro superpower, pro might makes right, pro strongman appeal in the martial arts.
Well, and I think there's also an element of guru status. Like you and I have discussed this before, where like I don't know what in particular about the martial arts setting sort of lends itself to this, or what kind of personality. Perhaps it's more based on the personalities that are attracted to the martial arts, but there is a tendency once you're a person who loves Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and have reaped all these benefits from it and found a sense of community in it and maybe turned your life around in other ways, and you have so much respect and endearment towards the instructor that you trust in this aspect of your life, that you'll also take their advice on anything else. Like there's no reason to think that somebody is an expert in taxes or health supplements or politics just because they're a jiu-jitsu guy. But there's a lot of people that are like, well, I don't have any strong feelings about politics, but my jujitsu professor seems to know what he's doing, and he has extremely strong political opinions. He must have thought this through. I'll just kind of go along with what he's saying. It certainly helps to endear me to him more and make me feel like I'm more part of the community and make him feel like he could trust me more, and it develops that relationship. So I think there's a lot of people that sort of their personalities sort of morph into that of their martial arts instructor, whether they even realize it's happening or not, because it becomes this the connection they have through the martial arts and all the things that martial arts can do to improve their lives. It makes them just put this enormous amount of trust and respect in this person, even in areas where it doesn't really make sense to do so.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny. We don't go to our car mechanics for health advice, but we go to our martial arts instructors for everything advice. It's nuts.
I always tell people if I'd have known I was going to run a jujitsu gym, I would have gone to school to become a therapist. I get lots of advice that I'm just not qualified for, but I can show you how to do an omoplata.
So if people want to learn how to do an omoplata from you, Jeff, or if they want to follow your political thoughts, what do they do?
I'm really active on all the social medias at Bellingham BJJ or Jeff Shaw BJJ. That's where I post a lot of my history content and such. I also have a history class right now where we talk about a lot of the issues Stephan just brought up, including the rise of Brazilian fascism and the Estado Novo and the role martial artists played in that. You can check that out at bjjmetalmodels.com/fight. It's always great talking to you, Tyson.
Uh, Tyson, if people want to learn an omoplata from you or they want to follow your political thoughts, how do they do that?
Well, I'm most active on TikTok. I've got on TikTok. I'm the Warrior Philosopher, all one word. And then on Instagram, I don't do as much on Instagram as I probably should, especially with TikTok's new ownership. But not that it matters; they're all owned by the same people. But on Instagram, it's the Warrior Philosopher IG. So I don't really do original content for Instagram. I just kind of repost TikTok sometimes there. So if there's somebody who happens to like Instagram but isn't really active on TikTok and they want to see some of my material, it is on there as well.
I'm going to encourage you to take all of your TikTok material and as part of your uploading to TikTok, put it on Instagram because it's really good. It's really well thought out. People have gotten a small taste of how you are off the cuff here. You should see this guy when he's given some thought to a specific topic. And what about the whole learning how to punch someone in the head or put them in a shoulder lock?
Well, you can also find me at Ironside Martial Arts. I think on TikTok it's literally just Ironside Martial Arts. On Instagram it'd be Ironside Martial Arts Canada. But I as much as I can, I try to keep that space non-political. But I don't know if you know this, Stefan, but if you're teaching a nogi uchimata and people happen to see that there's a pride flag visible in the background, it stops being a jujitsu post and starts being a political post real quick.
Yeah. Well, I'm so
You're trying to get reposted on BJJ Doc, aren't you?
yeah, you're going to be picked up by the BJJ scraper sites that are probably all owned by the same people, uh, and get done to you what was done to me, which is when I posted that a good way to discourage neo Nazis from training at your club was to post a pride flag And this got magically morphed into Stephan Kesting believes all gyms must have a pride flag. So yeah, that's not what I said. But of course, nobody checks the original. And thus I am now.
They know how to get clicks. I will give them that.
I believe what you said in the original was transgender for everyone. I believe that's what you said.
Yeah, okay. We'll leave it at that. Stephan Kesting wants transgender for everyone. Take care, guys.
Thanks, guys.